My name is Walt Hendricks. I'm 68 years old, and on the day my son moved me into a nursing home, I owned the building. Not owned it like I paid my deposit and signed a lease. I mean, I owned it. My name, my LLC, sitting quiet in a filing cabinet in Columbus since 2004. Dennis didn't know that. Christine, his wife, didn't know that. The woman at the front desk who handed me a lanyard with my name misspelled Walt Hendrick, no S, she sure as hell didn't know that. I want to tell you how I got there. Because it wasn't fast, and it wasn't stupid on my part. It was slow. It was patient. Somebody spent almost a year building a case that I was too much trouble to keep around, and I let them, because I didn't think my own son had it in him. But he had no idea what I'd already set in motion 20 years before he ever needed it. Before we get into it, if you've ever watched somebody build a case against you slow enough that you didn't see it coming, hit subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. All right, let's go back to where this started. Not with Dennis, with a warehouse. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio. Population back then about 6,000, now closer to 9. My father ran a metal shop out of a barn behind our house, fabricated gutters, weather vanes, the odd wrought iron fence for the church. I took it over in 1981 and turned it into something bigger. Hendricks sign and metal. If you drove through 3 counties in the 80s and 90s, odds are you passed a sign I made. The dairy barn on Route 9. The old Millbrook Cinema marquee, before it burned. The welcome sign into town, the one with the little wheat sheaf on it, that's mine too. I married Ruth in 1979. We had Dennis in 83. Ruth used to say I loved that shop like a second wife, and she wasn't entirely wrong, but she never once made me choose. She kept the books, raised our boy, and every Friday she'd bring me lunch in a paper sack and sit on an overturned bucket while I finished whatever I was welding. She died in 2011. Ovarian cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to the funeral. I don't talk about that part much. I'll just say it changes a man, watching that, and it changed how I thought about money and time and what actually matters, which is relevant to where this story goes. Now back in 2003, there was an old furniture warehouse on the edge of town, 3 stories, brick, been empty for years after the mill closed. A fella named Ridley owned it and wanted out cheap. I had some money saved from the shop, more than Dennis or anybody else knew about, because I never talked about money at the dinner table my father raised me. That money talk in front of family invites either jealousy or entitlement. And he wasn't wrong about that either. I bought that building through an LLC, Hendricks Holdings Group, named for my father. Not for me. I liked the idea that his name would be on something that outlived both of us. I leased it to a company that ran assisted living facilities across 3 states. They gutted it, put in handrails and call buttons and a dining hall, and it became Maple Ridge Senior Living. I collected rent. I never told Dennis. Never told Ruth's sister, never told anybody at church. It was just a number on a spreadsheet I looked at twice a year with my accountant, a quiet man named Curtis Boyle, who'd done my books since the shop days, and who is, frankly, the only reason any of what happens later in this story was possible. I want to be clear about something. I didn't buy that building because I had some plan to protect myself from my own son someday. I bought it because it was a good deal on a good building in a town I loved, and because after Ruth died, I needed something to occupy the part of my mind that used to occupy itself with her. That's all it was. For 17 years, that's all it ever needed to be. Then Dennis's restaurant started losing money. Dennis is a good cook. I'll say that for him plainly, because everything else I'm about to tell you is going to sound harsh, and I want it on the record that my son has real talent. He trained in Cleveland, worked under a chef who'd been on television twice, and in 2017 he opened Dauber's Grill on Main Street with money from a bank loan. Some savings, and I'll admit it, $20,000 from me that I never asked to be repaid. For the first 3 years it did fine. Not great. Fine, then 2020 happened, like it happened to everybody. And Dauber's never quite recovered its legs. By 2023, Dennis was refinancing equipment loans to cover payroll. By 2024, he was quietly behind on the building lease. I knew some of this, not all of it. Dennis wasn't a man who told his father when things were going wrong. He was a man who told his father when things were going great, and got very quiet in between. Christine, his wife, worked the front of house and did the books, which is a phrase I want you to remember, because it comes back around. Around March of last year, Christine started coming by my house more, bringing casseroles, asking if I was sleeping all right. Asking, real casual, whether I'd been to the doctor lately, whether my knee was still bothering me on the stairs. I thought it was kindness. I was lonely. Ruth's been gone 13 years, and my house had gotten quiet in a way that echoes at night if you're not careful about it, so I welcomed the company. I didn't think about why the questions always circled back to the stairs and the house and how big it was for one man. In April, she brought a doctor with her. Dr. Amrita Rao, younger woman, seemed decent enough. Said she wanted to run some cognitive screening, just routine, nothing to worry about. I did it because Christine asked nicely, and because I genuinely didn't think I had anything to hide. I forgot 2 words out of a list of 10. I got the date wrong by 1 day. I'd told you I was 68, but that week I'd have told you 67, because my birthday had just passed, and some part of my brain hadn't caught up. Small stuff. The kind of small stuff that happens to every human being on a bad afternoon. 2 weeks later, Dennis sat me down at my own kitchen table, the one Ruth and I bought in 1982. Still has a burn mark from a pan she set down too fast, and told me Dr. Rao had some concerns. I want you to understand what that word does to a man my age. Concerns, not a diagnosis, not a disease. Concerns, it's a word soft enough that nobody can be blamed for saying it, and sharp enough to plant a seed that grows whether you water it or not. By June, the conversations had a shape to them. Dennis and Christine would come for Sunday dinner. My dinner, I still cooked for them. Because that's what you do, and somewhere between the roast and the pie, one of them would mention options. Assisted living wasn't a punishment, Christine said. It was proactive. Lots of people made the move before they needed to, so they could enjoy the social side of it while they still had their health. I said no. Politely. The first few times. Then less politely. In July, Dennis brought paperwork. Power of attorney, he called it, just in case, just so if anything ever happened suddenly, somebody could handle my affairs without a court getting involved. He said it like it was a formality, like getting a spare key made. I signed it. I want to own that I signed it. 68 years old, and I signed a document handing my son legal authority over my finances because he's my son, and because some stubborn part of me still pictured him as the 8-year-old who used to fall asleep in my truck on the way home from the shop, sawdust in his hair. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until much later, was that the power of attorney Dennis had drawn up wasn't the just-in-case kind. It was durable and immediate. Effective the day I signed it. Christine's mother, a woman named Paulette Sook, who'd worked 22 years as the office manager at, and I want you to sit, with this Maple Ridge Senior Living, had helped Dennis with the paperwork. She knew exactly how these documents worked because she processed them for a living. She knew how to write one that looked routine and functioned as a door swinging fully open. In August, Dennis listed my house. He didn't ask me. He didn't tell me first. Either I found out because my neighbor, a good man named Herb Talley, who's lived across the street since Nixon was president, called to ask why there was a realtor's sign in my yard while I was standing in my own kitchen, looking out the window at it. I called Dennis. He said it was time-sensitive, a buyer was interested. A fast close would help everybody, and besides, wasn't it my choice, too, to simplify things? I asked him who the buyer was. He said a name I didn't recognize. A company, actually, something called Northgate Ventures. I'd find out later that Northgate Ventures was co-owned by Dennis's business partner from Daubers Grilly, a man named Ray Petrakis, and that the offer on my house, a house worth, conservatively, $340,000 in that market, was for $260,000. A friends and family discount nobody had asked my permission to give. The move happened on a Tuesday in September. I remember it was raining, one of those thin Ohio rains that doesn't look like much until you're soaked through from just walking to the car. Dennis and Christine packed most of it themselves, while I sat in the recliner and watched 43 years of my life get folded into boxes by two people who kept saying, cheerfully, that this was a fresh start. They drove me to Maple Ridge, my own building. I hadn't set foot in it in probably 6 years. Curtis handled all the operational calls. I just cashed checks so I didn't recognize the lobby. New carpet. A fish tank that hadn't been there before. A woman at the front desk, Badge said Marisol Ochoa, Director of Resident Services, who handed me a folder and a lanyard that spelled my last name wrong. Dennis hugged me, said he loved me, said this was temporary, just until the house sold and they figured out next steps. Christine kissed my cheek and said she'd visit every Sunday. They visited twice in the first 6 weeks. I had a room on the second floor, west-facing, decent light. Roommate named Old Pete, who'd been a Union Pacific brakeman for 30 years and snored like a diesel engine idling. The food was fine. The staff, mostly, were kind, underpaid, and stretched thin, but kind. The way people are when the job asks more of them than it pays for. What ate at me wasn't the room, or the food, or even Old Pete's snoring. It was smaller than that. It was the folder Marisol gave me on move-in day, sitting on my nightstand, that listed a monthly care fee of $6,200 money that was supposed to be coming out of the house sale proceeds, held by Dennis under that power of attorney for my care. By November, that fee hadn't been paid in 2 months. I found out because Marisol, a woman I'd met exactly once, who had absolutely no idea I owned the roof over her head, came to my room one evening, sat on the edge of Old Pete's empty bed while he was at bingo, and told me, gently as she could, that if the account didn't get current soon. The facility's policy required a conversation about alternative placement. She looked embarrassed saying it. She was doing her job. She had no idea what she was actually telling me, which was, my son sold my house, took the money that was supposed to keep me here, and hadn't paid the bill. I didn't say anything to her that night. I said thank you, and I asked her to close the door on her way out, and I sat in that room in the dark for a long time. That's the night I decided I wasn't going to yell at Dennis. I wasn't going to call a lawyer and start a war at Thanksgiving. I was going to find out exactly what he'd done, all of it, before I said a single word. The next morning I called Curtis Boyle. Curtis had done my books for 31 years. He was retired by then, technically, but he still kept a small office above the hardware store 2 doors down from where my old shop used to be, before I sold the building in 2019. I asked him to bring me everything he had on Hendricks Holdings Group, the LLC, the lease with Maple Ridge's operating company, the deed. He drove out that Saturday with a banker's box. Curtis is the only man I know who still keeps paper copies of everything. Man doesn't trust the cloud, doesn't trust a scanner, doesn't fully trust electricity if we're honest. That habit, that year, turned out to be worth more than gold. We sat in the Maple Ridge courtyard. Nobody thought twice about an old man having a meeting with his old accountant. It happens all the time in a place like that, and I went through it page by page. The deed, my name, clean as the day I signed it in 2004. The lease, current. The operating company paying rent to my LLC every month like clockwork, same as it had for 2 decades. Because that money never touched Dennis's hands at all, Curtis managed the LLC account directly, always had. Which meant something important. Whatever Dennis had done with the house money, the $260,000 from a below-market sale to his own business partner, none of it had anything to do with keeping the lights on at Maple Ridge. My rent as a resident, the $6,200 a month, was a completely separate obligation, paid from a completely separate account that Dennis controlled under that power of attorney. And he hadn't been paying it. So I asked Curtis one question. Where did the house money go? It took him 4 days, some phone calls to a friend at the title company, and one uncomfortable conversation with a loan officer who owed Curtis a favor from years back. But he found it. $241,000 of the $260,000 from my house sale had gone directly into paying down Dauber's Grill's equipment loan and covering 3 months of back rent on the restaurant space. The remaining $19,000 had gone into an account jointly held by Dennis and Christine. None of it, not $1, had gone toward my care. Now, I want to tell you something about the building I owned. Back in 2009, after a story broke about elder neglect at a different facility, 2 counties over cameras, finding an aide roughing up a resident who couldn't speak up for himself, I'd required, as landlord, that Maple Ridge install security cameras in every common area. Hallways, the dining hall, the courtyard, the front desk. Not the residents' private rooms. I wasn't interested in spying on anybody's dignity, but everywhere shared. I paid for half the installation myself. It cost me about $11,000, money I never once thought I'd need back. Those cameras had been running, quietly, for 15 years. I asked Marisol carefully, without explaining why, whether the facility still kept camera footage on file, and for how long. 90 days, she said, standard retention per the operating agreement with the landlord. I hadn't been to visit the front desk much since move-in, but I remembered that Paulette Sook, Christine's mother, still worked there as office manager. And I remembered that the power of attorney Dennis used to sell my house. The just-in-case document I'd signed back in July had a signature date on it that didn't quite square with what I actually remembered signing. I asked Marisol, still without tipping my hand, whether the front desk's camera covered the small meeting room where family paperwork usually got signed. It did. I asked Curtis to help me arrange one more thing before I moved. Maple Ridge held a monthly resident and family council meeting, open to any family with someone living there, mostly to discuss activities calendars and menu complaints, and the occasional gripe about thermostat settings. I asked Marisol if I could have 5 minutes on the agenda for the December meeting. She said of course, thinking I wanted to suggest a new bingo prize or something. I called Dennis and Christine and told them I wanted them there. I said I had something to say about my care and I wanted the family present. I didn't tell them what. I let them believe, I think, that I was finally going to make the plea they'd been waiting on, the one where I admit the move was for the best. Thank them for their patience. Settle in. Christine's mother, Paulette, would be there too. She always sat in on those meetings as staff. The night before, I asked Marisol for one more thing, not as a resident, but I finally told her who I actually was. I showed her the deed. I watched her face change, slowly, from polite confusion to something closer to shock. And then this part mattered to me to relief. Because it turned out my building's operating company had been fighting, quietly, for 2 years to get approval from corporate for a badly needed FAC upgrade, and the landlord, me, though nobody there had ever laid eyes on me as anything but a resident named Walt Hendrick, no S had never once responded to their requests. Because Curtis handled routine maintenance approvals and hadn't flagged it as urgent. I told her I'd approve it that week. She cried a little, right there in the hallway. Told me the units had been failing since August, and residents on the 3rd floor had been sleeping in sweaters. I made a note, right then, that whatever else happened with my family, that vac system was getting fixed before Christmas. The council room held about 30 folding chairs, half full that Thursday evening. Dennis and Christine sat near the front, dressed like they were going to church. Dennis's hand on Christine's knee in a way that looked less like affection and more like he was holding her still. Paulette sat off to the side with her staff binder, glasses pushed up on her head. Marisol opened the meeting with the usual business, a note about the new activities director, a complaint about the Tuesday meatloaf, resolved with a promise to survey residents on menu preferences. Then she looked at me and said, "Walt has asked for a few minutes." "Walt, go ahead." I stood up. My knee doesn't love standing quickly, but I managed. "Most of you know me as Walt," I said. "Room 214. Roommate snores like a freight train, which, given his background, I suppose is fitting." A few laughs. Old Pete, in the back, gave a thumbs up. "What most of you don't know," I said, "is that I've owned this building since 2004. The room went quiet in that particular way a room goes quiet when something shifts underneath it." I watched Dennis's face. I want to describe it honestly, it wasn't fear yet. It was confusion, the kind that hasn't caught up to what it's about to become. I bought it as a real estate investment, long before any of my family needed a place like this. I've never made a habit of talking about money at family dinners. My father raised me that way, and it served me fine for most of my life. It stopped serving me fine this year. I laid it out plain. No shouting. I described the house, its value, the sale, the buyer, Northgate Ventures, and Ray Petrakis's business relationship with my son. I described the $260,000 and where $241,000 of it had actually gone. I described the $6,200 monthly care fee that Dennis, under a power of attorney he'd had drawn up in July, had stopped paying by September. "Son, I want to say something to you directly, and then I'm going to say something to everyone else, and then I'm done. I know Daubers has been struggling. I know how much that place means to you. You built something real there, and I've always been proud of that. If you'd come to me and said, 'Dad, I'm drowning, I need help,' I'd have found a way. I always would have. What I can't forgive is that instead of asking, you decided I was already gone. You decided a memory screening with 2 wrong answers on a Tuesday afternoon meant you could stop asking me things and start deciding them for me." Christine's face had gone pale. Paulette, off to the side, had gone very still. "I have one more thing," I said, "and then I'll sit down." I nodded at Marisol, who'd set up a small screen at my request. "This facility has security cameras in every common area I required them, 15 years ago, and I paid for half of them myself. They cover the meeting room where family paperwork gets signed." Marisol was kind enough to pull footage from July 11th, the date on the power of attorney I supposedly signed, granting Dennis immediate authority over my finances. The screen lit up. Grainy, time-stamped footage, the meeting room, empty except for Dennis, Paulette, and a stack of paper. No me in the room at all. The actual date on my calendar, and Curtis had the receipts to prove it, I'd been 40 minutes away that whole afternoon, at Curtis's office, going over something else entirely. The document I'd actually signed, the just-in-case version I remembered, had gone missing sometime after Paulette processed the paperwork. The version filed with the county was a different one. Immediate, durable, dated to match a day I could prove. On camera, I hadn't been anywhere near that room. I looked at Dennis. "I'm not doing this to destroy you. I'm doing this because I built something, brick by brick, my whole life, so that my family would never have to choose between doing right and getting by. And somewhere along the way, you decided doing right was optional. That's the part I can't get past tonight. Not the money. What happened after, wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a scene, no shouting match, no police called that night. Dennis and Christine left quietly. Paulette resigned from Maple Ridge within the week the operating company, once I formally raised the falsified document with them as landlord, had no interest in keeping her on, and frankly, neither did I. I hired an elder law attorney the next morning, a sharp woman named Renata Ibarra, recommended by Curtis, and had the power of attorney revoked and reissued this time, granted to nobody but myself, with Curtis named as a backup only in the event I'm ever genuinely incapacitated, verified by 2 independent doctors, not one screening on a bad afternoon. I didn't sue Dennis. I want to be honest about why it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. And it wasn't softness. It was that Renata explained the county sheriff's office was already looking into the falsified document as a potential case of elder financial exploitation, separate from anything I chose to pursue civilly, and that the loan Dennis had paid down with my house money was now under scrutiny by his own bank once the source of the payment came out. Ray Petrakis's Northgate Ventures deal on my house got unwound in January, the title company, once Curtis's contact flagged the below-market sale alongside a family relationship that hadn't been disclosed, forced a rescission. I got my house back. Not the money Dennis had already spent, but the house, deed clean, in my name again. Dauber's Grill closed in February. I won't pretend that didn't hurt to watch, even after everything. Dennis is working now for another restaurant across the county, line cook, not owner, a step back, for a man who used to run his own kitchen. But an honest one. Christine reached out in March, asked to talk. We did, over coffee at a diner neither of us used to like the coffee at, which somehow made it feel more honest. She admitted her mother had pushed harder than she'd wanted to on the paperwork. Admitted she'd let herself believe the story about the memory screening more than the evidence actually supported, because believing it made the house sale feel less like theft and more like help. I don't know that I fully trust her yet. I know I haven't fully closed the door either. My granddaughter, Nora Dennis's daughter from his first marriage, 22 now, finishing nursing school 2 towns over, showed up at Maple Ridge in October, before any of this broke, just to visit her grandfather. No agenda, the way a person shows up when they actually love somebody. She kept showing up through the whole mess, didn't take a side, exactly, just kept showing up for me. I moved the deed on the house into a trust in February, and Nora's named as the one who inherits it, along with the LLC, when I'm gone. Not because I'm angling to punish Dennis forever, but because a house is worth something, and I've learned the hard way that worth something needs to sit with somebody who shows up without being asked. I moved out of room 214 in January. Not far there's a small cottage on the Maple Ridge property, originally built as a groundskeeper's residence that I'd forgotten I even owned until Curtis reminded me. I fixed it up myself, first real work with my hands in years, and I live there now. Close enough to visit old Pete for coffee most mornings. Turns out I miss the snoring a little, which surprised me. Close enough to keep an eye on that HVAC system, which got replaced in December, right on schedule, the way I promised Marisol it would. On the day my son moved me into that nursing home, I owned the building, and he had no idea what I'd already set in motion. I still own it. I still live on the property, by choice now instead of somebody else's decision. And most mornings, when I walk past that little office with the misspelled lanyard photo still pinned to a corkboard somewhere, Walt Hendrick, no S, I think about how close I came to just accepting the story I was told about myself. That I was slipping, that I was a burden, that somebody else knew better than I did what I needed. They didn't. If you've ever had somebody try to write your ending for you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you'd have done in my shoes. I read every one.